His name was Roy Sullivan. He was born in 1912 in Greene County, Virginia, the kind of place where the mountains don't ask your permission before they change the weather on you, where a man could walk out the door in sunshine and be soaked through before he reached the woodpile. His father farmed. His grandfather farmed. Roy Sullivan became a park ranger. Not because it was easier, because he loved the mountains the way some people love music. Not as a hobby, not as a backdrop, but as the actual substance of life. The thing that made the rest of it make sense. He spent 36 years as a ranger in Shenandoah National Park, patrolling the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. 600 square miles of forest and ridge that stretched from front porch to horizon and made the rest of the world feel, on certain mornings, like it belonged to a different story entirely. He married a woman named Jean. They had a house not far from the park. He drove the same roads to work for so many years that the drive itself became a kind of meditation. The same turns, the same views opening up through the trees, the same quality of light depending on the season and the time of day. He was, by any measure, an ordinary man living an ordinary life in extraordinary country. Until the summer of 1942. He was on Rocky Top Mountain when it happened the first time. A storm had moved in faster than the forecast suggested. That happened in the Blue Ridge. The mountains made their own weather, compressed it between the ridges, pushed it upward until it became something else entirely. Roy had been through 100 storms in those mountains. He knew the signs. He knew when to find shelter and when to wait it out. He was moving toward the ranger station when the lightning struck the tree beside him. The bolt jumped from the tree to Roy's leg, burned through his right leg, blew out the nail on his big toe. He fell. The rain came down around him in the particular indifferent way rain falls on things that are already broken. He lay there for a moment in the mud and the pine needles and the smell of scorched wood and scorched skin, and understood, at some level below thought, that something had just happened to him that most people don't survive. Then he got up, walked down the mountain, drove himself to the hospital. The doctor treated his leg, asked what happened. Roy told him. The doctor said he was lucky. Roy said yes, he supposed he was. He went back to work the following week. Jean didn't ask him to stop. Not after the first time. She had married a man who loved those mountains the way other men loved their families, completely, without reservation, with a fidelity that didn't require explanation. Asking Roy to leave Shenandoah would have been like asking him to leave himself. So she said what she could say. Be careful. And Roy said what he always said. I will. And neither of them mentioned that being careful hadn't been enough to prevent what had just happened. Because some truths are too heavy to carry out loud every morning. 27 years passed. 27 years of patrols, of seasons changing over the same ridges, of storms rolling through and Roy watching them from ranger stations and trailheads with the particular attention of a man who had learned something the hard way and was still figuring out what it meant. He wasn't afraid of the storms. That would be the easy way to tell the story. He was respectful of them in the way you are respectful of something that has already shown you what it can do. Then in July of 1969, on a mountain road in Shenandoah, the sky found him again. He was driving his truck on patrol when the storm came through. The lightning hit the truck, knocked Roy unconscious. When he came to, his eyebrows were gone. Burned completely away, just gone. As if someone had taken an eraser to the top half of his face and decided that particular detail was no longer necessary. He sat in the truck for a moment, looked at himself in the rearview mirror. Then he drove back to the station and reported what had happened. His supervisor looked at him across the desk for a long moment. "Roy," he said. "I know," Roy said. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that the odds of this happening twice to the same man in the same mountains in the same life were the kind of numbers that made mathematics feel like a suggestion rather than a law. It happened again the following year. April 1970. Roy was checking a trail when the storm rolled in with a speed the Blue Ridge Mountains specialized in. No warning, no gradual build-up, just suddenly present and completely serious. The lightning hit him in the shoulder. He was knocked to the ground, lay there in the wet leaves with his shoulder burning and the rain falling on him and the smell, that particular smell, of something electrical and wrong that he had now learned to associate with the aftermath of his own survival. A hiker found him on the trail, a young man from Maryland who had been walking the Appalachian Trail for a week and had never in his life seen what he was looking at now. Roy looked up at him from the ground. "I'm all right," Roy said. The young man helped him to his feet, walked him back to the trailhead, kept looking at Roy's shoulder, at the burn marks on his uniform, with an expression Roy had started to recognize, the particular face people make when they are trying to decide whether what they are seeing is real. "Does this happen to you often?" the hiker asked. Roy looked at the sky. The storm was already moving east, the way Blue Ridge storms did, arriving fast, leaving everything wet and stunned in their wake. "Third time," Roy said. The young man from Maryland didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "What are the chances?" Roy put on his hat, straightened his uniform. "I've been wondering that myself," he said. His co-workers started to change around him. Not cruelly, not deliberately. Just the way people change when they are standing close to something they don't have a category for. Some of them started timing their breaks differently, finding reasons to be indoors when Roy was heading out on patrol. One ranger, a young man named Dennis, who had come to Shenandoah from Tennessee and had the particular bluntness of someone who didn't see the point of being indirect, told Roy to his face that he thought Roy should request an indoor assignment. "You've been hit 3 times, Dennis said. 3 times, Roy. At some point that stops being bad luck and starts being something else." Roy considered this. "What else would it be?" he said. Dennis didn't have an answer, which was, Roy thought, a more honest response than most people gave him. "I appreciate it," Roy said, "but I'm a ranger. This is where I work." Dennis shook his head, went back to his desk. And Roy went back to the mountains. The 4th strike came in 1972. He was patrolling near the Skyline Drive when lightning came out of a clear sky, not out of a storm, not out of an obvious threat, but out of blue air, with the casual contempt of something that had decided the usual rules didn't apply here. It hit Roy in his hair, set it on fire. He patted it out with his hands, sat down on a rock, looked at his hands, slightly burned, shaking slightly, the hands of a man who was starting to understand something he didn't have words for. The thing about the fourth time is that it removes a certain kind of comfort. The first time is shock. The second time is pattern. The third time is disbelief. The fourth time is something quieter and colder. It's the moment you understand that this is not a story with a clear ending. It's just your life. And your life includes this. Roy sat on the rock for a while, let the feelings settle. Then he got up, finished his patrol. Jean noticed the change, even though Roy didn't describe it. That was the thing about 30 years of marriage. You stopped needing language for the things that mattered most. She saw it in the way he sat at the kitchen table in the evenings now, the way he looked out the window at the sky before he answered questions, the way he sometimes paused at the door in the morning before heading to work. Just a second, just a breath, as if he was checking something that other people never needed to check. She didn't ask him to stay home. She had tried that once, after the third time, and Roy had looked at her with the particular patience of a man who understood that she was asking him to become someone different from who he actually was. Jean, he had said, just her name. And she had understood. So she made his lunch every morning, put it in the same brown bag, said be careful, meant something larger than those two words could ever contain. And Roy went to work. The fifth strike was 1973. His ranger hat was blasted off his head. He was thrown to the ground. His ankle was injured. He got up. The sixth was 1974. He was standing near a ranger station when the lightning hit him again, injured his ankle a second time, left a burn that ran from his shoulder to his hip. The newspapers had found him by now. The story had been circulating in the way unusual stories circulate, picked up, reported, passed along, growing slightly with each telling. A ranger in Virginia, hit by lightning, again and again. Reporters called the station. Roy gave brief answers. He was not a man who enjoyed attention. He didn't see himself as remarkable. That was the thing people found hardest to understand. He saw himself as a ranger who kept having an unusual thing happen to him. The Guinness Book of World Records eventually listed him as the person struck by lightning more times than any other human being in recorded history. Roy received the news the way he received most news. He nodded, went back to work. The seventh time was June 25th, 1977. Roy was retired by then, 65 years old. The mountains still outside his window, still the same mountains, still rolling through their seasons the way they had when he was young and the way they would when he was gone. He was fishing near a pond not far from his house. The sky did what the sky did. The lightning came down. It burned his chest and stomach. He lost consciousness on the bank of the pond. He came back to himself lying in the grass, looking up at the sky that had just, for the seventh time, decided it wasn't finished with him, or hadn't yet decided to finish him. He was never sure afterward which way to think about it. He drove himself to the hospital, because that was what Roy Sullivan did. He lived 6 more years. He had his mountains, he had his house, he had Gene, who had made his lunch every morning for decades and said, "Be careful," and meant something the words couldn't hold. And he had the quiet life of a man who had been struck by lightning 7 times and was now in his retirement simply living with what that meant, which was harder than it sounds. Because people who have survived extraordinary things are often expected to have been transformed by them, to carry their survival as a kind of wisdom, a testimony, a reason. Roy didn't seem transformed. He seemed like Roy, a man who loved the mountains, who had done his job, who had gotten up each time from the mud and the pine needles and the smell of something electrical and wrong. But what people didn't always see, what Gene saw, what Dennis the Ranger saw, what the people who knew him well saw, was what 7 strikes had quietly cost. Not his body. His body was tough. It had proven that. Something else. The pauses at the door. The way he watched the sky. The patience that had grown so deep it sometimes looked, from the outside, like distance. The way a man can survive something 7 times and still not be finished being changed by it. Roy Sullivan died on September 28, 1983. He was 71 years old. He died by his own hand. The reports at the time suggested it was over a matter of the heart, unrequited love in the years after Gene. A different kind of storm entirely, one with no lightning rod, no uniform to straighten afterward, no trail to finish walking. Just a man who had survived everything the sky could send, and found that the hardest thing to survive was something quieter, closer, with no warning and no smell and no way to see it coming from across the ridge. The world record stood. His name was in the books. The mountains were still there. And somewhere in that gap between the man who got up 7 times and the man who, in the end, didn't, there's a question about survival that lightning can't answer. What does it mean to be impossible to kill by one thing and vulnerable to another? What does 7 strikes build in a person, quietly, over decades, that no hospital could see and no record could measure? And what do we mean, really, when we call someone lucky? The Blue Ridge Mountains still stand. The trails Roy Sullivan walked for 36 years are still there. The same switchbacks, the same views opening through the trees, the same weather rolling through, on its own schedule, indifferent and magnificent in the way of things that don't require an audience. Rangers still patrol those trails. Some of them know Roy's story, some don't. The ones who do tend to tell it the same way, starting with the number 7, because that's the part that makes people stop. But the number isn't the story. The number is just the door. The story is the man behind it. The ranger who went back to work after the first time, and the second, and the third, and 4 more after that. The man who made his own lunch famous by surviving everything the sky could produce, and then showed that survival doesn't protect you from the things the sky can't reach. Roy Sullivan loved those mountains. They didn't love him back, not in the way that keeps a person safe. But he went anyway, every morning for 36 years. Because some things are worth doing, even when they cost you something. And some questions don't have answers. They just have the mountains still standing, and the sky above them, and the long silence of a man who kept walking out the door until the day he didn't.